Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. All right, what's going on, guys? This is Rob, and I have been trying to find a way recently to get us caught up on the X-Men stuff and to do it in the reading order. The biggest problem here is there's just too much. It's too much to try to do in order of like how you would actually read it. So the only way to do this is to basically do it as entire volumes, right? Entire runs. So what we're going to do here is we're going to basically finish out the instances of Dawn of X stuff, right? The things that we didn't finish. Marauders, New Mutants, Excalibur, different things like that. And we're just going to do it as the individual volumes. So it won't necessarily be in like issue by issue reading order, like the way that we did Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, because I was wanting to do it that way. It's simply just too much. So with this instance, we're basically picking up, kind of continuing on, I guess, really, where we started with the Marauders, in the sense that, if you guys recall, and we did this quite some time ago, it was actually last year when we started it, that you basically had what was essentially the return of the Hellfire Club, but it's really considered the Hellfire Trading Company. Now, all this came out of like the formation of Krakoa and a unified mutant empire or mutant nation that existed there. And so previously the Hellfire Club was just a single group of mutants who existed out there, like so many other different groups of mutants, but the difference is that the Hellfire Club would actually work to gain power and money through like subterfuge, right? So they would work largely behind the scenes, but they would influence governments, companies, different things like that. And it was all just to kind of bolster their own power across the entirety of the world. When Krakoa was launched, then basically the Hellfire Club as it existed was essentially disbanded, and all the various members ended up taking up arms with Krakoa, and then it was relaunched as a Hellfire Trading Company. Now, one of the things that had gone on is you had a woman by the name of Zhao who had basically put out there that her husband had been taken by mutants, right? Or that he had essentially been whisked away. And the result of this is that it really kind of allowed Zhao to kind of go forward as just another member out there who was largely anti-mutant. Now, in hindsight, at the time that I was reading this, it really seemed like it was kind of building up a lot of anti-mutant groups. The reality is that it was really just kind of a human response to the idea that mutants were consolidating in a singular location. It was pretty straightforward and pretty basic, if we're being a little honest with ourselves. But one of the missions that Kitty Pryde is on alongside Bishop, who, for those of you guys who don't know, Bishop has the ability to absorb the energies of others and then channel it back at them, or really their power, with the exception of telepathy, but he can absorb all kinds of energy and then just channel it back at people in different ways. Concussive blast is usually how it goes. They're on a mission to essentially find out the truth about what Zhao's talking about, only to find out that her husband is actually being held captive by Zhao. And the reason why is because, if you guys recall, one of the things that had happened in the rise of the mutant population and the launch or the creation of Krakoa is you had a cult that gave way called the Order of X. And this was basically humans that worship mutants, right? They were literally part of a pro-mutant cult. And her husband had joined one, right? Zhao's husband had basically joined one. And because all of her aspirations were predicated on the idea that no one could know that she was pro-mutant or really her husband was pro-mutant, because she was so staunchly anti-mutant, she'd effectively locked him away. And so when Kitty Pryde and Bishop rescue her husband and then basically bring him in front of her while she's in Taipei Arena, essentially in front of the world, that this basically leads to the revelation that she lied about everything, which completely discredits her on the political scene. And so in response to this, what she ends up doing is basically meeting with the newly launched Hellfire Club, which is actually being ran by Cade Kilgore. Now, here's the thing. Those of you guys who don't know who Cade Kilgore is, and if you don't, God, woe betide you. Cade Kilgore is amazing. He has no powers, right? This kid has no powers or no abilities, but he is ruthless for a little kid. Check this out. Cade Kilgore killed his dad and took over his company. Like, literally orchestrated his dad being ousted from his own company, took it over himself, and then had his dad killed. Like, how's that for ruthless, right? That's pretty intense. But the thing that you kind of follow up with after that is kind of this thing that's going on between Christian Frost and Bobby Drake. Now, of course, it makes perfect sense, but Christian Frost is basically the brother of Emma Frost, right? He's the only male in the Frost family. And one of the cool little tidbits about his character is that, one, he's in a relationship with Bobby Drake, and then two, he's immune to Emma Frost's telepathy. And it works like that with everybody in the Frost family. They're all immune to the powers of the other members of their family. But one of the things that's happening is Christian is trying to get Bobby Drake over to his side, to basically join his organization. And Bobby Drake's like, no, right? I'm part of the Marauders with Kitty Pryde. It's all good. But one of the things that goes on here here, and this is kind of important, is what's happening with Sebastian Shaw, right? So one of the things that we talked about in the last time that we did these videos is that Sebastian Shaw was really he really believed he was in line for the position as the Red King of the Hellfire Club. Instead, they made Kitty Pryde the Red Queen. And the result of this is that it basically put him in a position to where the power he was most commonly accustomed to was essentially stripped of him, right? Because he was, one of the de facto leaders of the original Hellfire Club. And the expectation of Shaw was that with the Hellfire Club being rebranded as the Hellfire Trading Company, that it would just be a lateral move. And he would just move over into this new organization, and all the power that he previously enjoyed would stay the same. But it's a reshuffling across the board, right, in its entirety. And Kitty Pryde doesn't really pull any punches, right? She's like, hey, I gotta admit, it's really good having the spot that was originally meant for you, Sebastian Shaw, mostly because of the fact that you caused the X-Men so much hell over the years. Why she doesn't extend that kind of disdain towards Emma Frost is largely because of Generation X, right? That's basically what it is. For those of you guys who don't know, Kitty Pryde was never officially part of Generation X. Honestly, she was a little too old for it by the time it came around, but Jubilee certainly was. If you guys ever watched X-Men the Animated Series, she actually was releasing comics before X-Men the Animated Series came out. So the thing to know is that when Emma Frost first popped up on the scene, she was basically a villain of the X-Men. Later on, she formed what I consider to be the antithesis of the New Mutants at the time, which was basically like her own group called the Hellions. Largely, once the Hellions were totally obliterated, she ended up just kind of turncoating and basically became a good guy, joined the X-Men, and then had her own team called Generation X. But the fact that Emma Frost was at one point a villain of the X-Men and then went on to become an ally to the team and even a leader really earned the respect of Kitty Pryde along with pretty much everybody there. They were really hesitant at first. They were like, look, you've been trying to kill us for years. Why should we believe you now? And she was kind of like, well, because I'm trying to be a good guy. You have to believe me. That was basically it. And so it was ultimately she ended up becoming a member of the X-Men franchise, or the X-Men landscape, ever since then. Sebastian Shaw never did that. He was always a dick, and he was always trying to kill the X-Men. So no wonder nobody trusts this guy. Plus he's got mutton chops. When have you ever heard of anybody extending trust to a person who had mutton chops, right? With the exception of a buddy of mine, Daniel, I wouldn't trust anybody who had mutton chops. Right? It's just that kind of person looks sus. So the whole thing behind this is you have this really interesting conversation that takes place between Emma Frost and Kitty Pryde. One of the things to remember is that Kitty Pryde at this point could not pass through the Krakoan gates. And because of that, Sebastian Shaw, and he's not the only one, does not actually see her as a rightful member of Krakoa. The island more or less rejected her. We never really found out, or at least at the time, we didn't really know why. We simply just knew that it didn't. And so as a result of that, there were a lot of people who were staunchly pro-mutant and really more about mutant kind being a purist race that didn't really see her as somebody who belonged there. Now, the reality is she's been such a long-standing member of the X-Men, and actually at one point had the opportunity to side with Emma Frost and didn't. Instead, she sided with the X-Men, so she never became part of the Hellions. But because she's been a part of the team for so long, no one's really questioning, what's going on. It's really kind of the thing of like, why can't she get in, right? That was kind of the big mystery that was going on at the time. And so it's a little bit of a cool thing, because her concern is that if she can't access the island of Krakoa, there's no reason to believe the resurrection protocols would work for her. And so if she dies, she stays dead. There's no real way to bring her back. That's her biggest concern. And that she's going to end up dying just old and alone on this island by herself, and no one there to really keep her. She'll have friends who were there, but that'll be it. She'll have to watch them stay youthful while she grows old. And so it's kind of a cool little bit of a bonding moment there. But in the midst of this whole thing, where they had basically rescued a whole bunch of mutants that were being held captive, they end up getting a kind of emergency call that hey, there is another situation again. We got to go out there and we got to rescue some more mutants, right? Because that's kind of the charter behind the Marauders story, is they ride around on this amazing yacht that they literally jacked, right? They hijacked this $1 billion yacht, and they just ride around blasting 80s rock music, which is awesome, and rescuing people on missions, which is even more awesome. I love the idea of the Marauders. It was the coolest thing ever. But essentially they arrive, the Marauders arrive and really kind of save, all these younger mutants that are basically being held captive. There's a couple things going on here. One, the Hellfire Club, led by Cade Kilgore, is essentially making their move, in the sense that they're launching a strike or trying to find and really test the power of the Marauders to see what all that they can do. The Marauders, of course, end up coming out on top. They grab all these kids and they basically save the day and then essentially leave. But the other thing that goes on is this vessel seemingly comes out of nowhere, and then it has this group on it that's called Hominis Verendi. Now, I will say that Hominis Verendi is an organization organization that's kind of been met with mixed reactions, and I'm not gonna lie, you know, it's interesting. For example, I saw a review recently that really seemed to kind of nail it in the sense that while the whole run of Jonathan Hickman and really the whole relaunch of X-Men under Hickman is really kind of dealing with like the adaptability and the capability of the mutant population, this grander story arc of like taking the future, right, inheriting the future from humanity to solidify their continued existence in the war that's to come between humans and mutants, this grand scale war that we saw in House and Powers of X, that it really seems to be kind of almost marginalized by the idea that like Kitty Pryde and the Marauders are basically fighting a bunch of billionaire kids who are essentially geniuses trying to like wreak havoc on the mutant population. That there are other people who kind of look at it and say, no, like it's actually really cool, right? It brings a sort of unsuspecting gambit to the X-Men landscape in the sense that we've seen so many instances where there's like superpowered beings who have abilities or government-backed organizations that are looking to take down mutants or whatever, that it's cool to see like a reinvented version of the Hellfire Club that's basically ran by younger people. It really kind of depends on how you slice it. But the reality of this is that Hominis Verendi is basically ran, or it was kind of created and launched by the new Hellfire Club of Cade Kilgore and all those guys. And so literally they're looking to do what so many other people are doing and trying to take down the mutant population, but they're doing it on a far more grand scale. We'll talk about how grand that scale is here in a minute, and we'll talk about it more in future videos. But the overall gist here is that Kitty Pryde and their efforts to take out these guys are basically met by the arrival of Chen Zhao and then Donald Pierce. Now, Chen Zhao, of course, again, we've talked about her. Donald Pierce, the reason why Kitty Pryde's so pissed off to see him is Donald Pierce has been a long-time enemy of the X-Men, right? There was even one point where he only joined the inner circle of the Hellfire Club just so he could try to destroy it because he hated mutants that much. The guy he's interesting depending on who's writing the story. He's one of those characters, he's not consistently interesting, right? It's not one of these things where it's like every single story that Donald Pierce is in is amazing. There's really like, if I had to give it a ratio, I'd be like 90% crap, 10% cool. That's kind of how Donald Pierce works. That not all of his stories are interesting. And even like you guys will kind of see in this one, he's not really all that intriguing. That you end up having Hominis Verendi that are doing everything they can to try to take out the mutants, but Storm kind of jumps in and then literally kicks Donald Pierce off the boat. And that's more or less Donald Pierce, right? I mean, that's really all that happens to him. He's kind of a throwaway character. Honestly, he's been that way ever since Chris Claremont introduced the revelation that he only joined the Hellfire Club for the purpose of trying to destroy the mutant population. As soon as Donald Pierce was ousted in that way and then basically booted from the Hellfire Club, he's kind of been one of the many whipping boys that Marvel has that they just beat on, right? They write these stories and he just gets trashed and nothing he does matters, and that's basically it. And so ultimately, with the day being saved and this the Hominis Verendi more or less being defeated, it leads to everybody kind of heading out, right? Everybody basically, the mutants heading back to Krakoa to drop these kids off and for them to kind of take up safe haven on the island itself among the mutant population. And then out of nowhere, Sebastian Shaw pops up. And we basically end up finding out that Sebastian Shaw had more or less orchestrated all of this. That he had approached Donald Pierce and basically offered him a bunch of money to work alongside Chen Zhao. That Chen Zhao herself is working alongside the newly created Hellfire Club. That there doesn't really seem to be any direct indication that Sebastian Shaw is working directly with Cade Kilgore and his Hellfire Club. It kind of seems like one of these things where he's working through proxies, but the long and short of it is that he's working to basically take out Kitty Pryde by getting people like Bobby Drake to leave the team and then side with people like Christian Frost, different things like that. But one of the things that he does here is he actually grabs some Krakoan seeds that basically have fast-growing vines, most likely grown by Black Tom Cassidy, who's able to control vines or control really any kind of plant life. But the important thing here is that he basically ends up having these vines that essentially neutralize the power of Kitty Pryde. And they literally drag her down into the ocean and then it kills her, right? Kitty Pryde dies. And it's kind of a crazy thing because at the time that happened, it was like, wow, because as far as I'm aware, Kitty Pryde is one of those characters that Marvel's never killed before. And it's kind of nuts to see that whole thing happen. But Kitty Pryde was basically killed off. And the idea here is that because Sebastian Shaw had previously been rejected as the Red King, that most likely it would just kind of be viewed as like a mission gone wrong or something like that. And ultimately it would just kind of be chalked up to either his son Shinobi taking over that role or that role being offered to him. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.